Hey folks, welcome. We are going to begin in just a couple minutes. Thank you for being here. And I'm excited to have you all here. And Dudleen, if you can do me a favor, which is text me during this to make sure the slides are advancing in the early going and are sticking with my narration, because sometimes the slides stick. I don't really know why, but I just want to make sure they're moving. Thanks for coming, everybody. We'll get going in just a minute. Thanks for coming by tonight, everybody. Okay, I'm going to get going here in a second. So fasten your seatbelts, team. We're going to start going. Excuse me. Hey, everybody, this is Simon Rosenberg from NDN. Welcome to our monthly presentation of With Democrats, Things Get Better. Every time we do this, the data is fresh, the insights are new. It's the core presentation, but we do make sure it's fresh and different every time. I actually, in this one, have made some substantial changes, probably the most I've made in a year or so, and I'm excited to share it with you. We also will be showing this again tomorrow, Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. If you like it and want other people to come, please let them know. And a recording will be available afterwards, of course. So let's get going. So the premise of this presentation, With Democrats, Things Get Better, the original version of this was I built in 2017. And it was really as a rejection of what the big argument Trump was making about American carnage and the decline of the United States. I felt that things were actually better than that, and the country was doing better than Trump had said. And so we began to present this as an alternative argument, and we called it patriotism and optimism at the time, and about all the good things that America had done. And so we are now many years later, almost 6 years later, it's sort of the grandchild of this original presentation. And I've had great help along the way from Georgia and Chris, who've been instrumental in helping me build this thing over time. So let's get going. So first of all, our story begins really in 1989. It's the premise of this presentation that, and Dudleen, let me make sure that you see the slides moving, is that the premise of this presentation that everything changed in 1989, and that it was a discontinuity, that the Cold War period had ended, a new age of globalization began, that this period in our history was, that things had really changed, and that we really need to really understand American politics today. You need to ground yourself, I think, starting in 1989 and moving forward. And because so much has changed, because we have gone through just such dramatic, extraordinary change over this time, I think sometimes we forget how different things are than they used to be. We don't really have a name for this age. It's not the Cold War era. I call it the age of globalization. But in many ways, the great story of this time has been rapid, systemic, global change and transformation, most of it for the good, by the way. And so if the backstory of our politics over this period of time has been change and transformation, I think it's fair to really ask the basic question, which is how the two parties in our system managed against change. Any of you who run organizations know that managing against change is what we do every day, right? Everything is changing all the time. And I think it's a fair way to sort of look at the two parties today. And what you find when you start going into the data is that one party has repeatedly done well and managed well against change, and another party hasn't. This is just basic jobs created, during the presidency since 1989, the Berlin Wall fell and communism ended. And you can see that Democrats have repeatedly created a lot of jobs, Republicans not so much. Trump was the first president since Hoover to have had net job loss in his first term. We also, when I began this presentation, we used these two numbers, the 33.8 and we had actually a higher number for Republicans because Trump had lost ground. And we compared the 16 years of Bush's and Trump and the 16 years of Clinton and Obama. And as you can see here, there were 17 times more jobs created in those equivalent years, right? Of the 16 years of Democratic presidents, 16 years of Republican presidents. And then Biden comes along with this incredibly strong job performance in the last 2 years, largely due to his strong economic policies. And this is just an incredible stat. We sort of created this stat of jobs per month. It's something you now see around the internet quite a bit. But look at the Republican number: 10,000 jobs per month created, net new jobs over 16 years. So that means, that's 120,000 jobs a year. Last month, in an economic slowdown, we were at 223,000 jobs, right? So, we really, this is dramatic underperformance by Republicans over a long period of time and repeated strong performance by the Democrats. It's one of the reasons why the economic attacks on Biden from Republicans right now in general are so farcical in many ways, right? I mean, they're so incredible. Dudleen, we've moved along. You can see things have changed. The unemployment rate, this is one of my favorite slides in the deck. We've seen the unemployment rate drop by 3 points under Democrats. It's increased on average by 2 points under these Republicans, right? So incredible. Again, however you cut this data, you continue to see this remarkable contrast in performance. And when you add it all up, this is my favorite slide in the deck, which is that since 1989, there have been 47 million jobs created in America. 45 million have been created under Democratic presidents, 96%. Essentially all of them, right? I mean, essentially all of the progress we've made as a country has happened under Democratic presidents. Republicans have repeatedly struggled to carry their load, to do their part, right? This is the story of our politics since 1989. Let's go down and keep deep, going into data. As for those of you who know, I like data. Let's keep playing with the data here. This is, growth, GDP growth, again, strong Democratic performance. Republicans struggling to keep up. Obama's numbers are obviously depressed by what was an historically bad first year of his presidency, where he inherited a great recession. And obviously, if we had wanted to play games with data, we would have taken that out, but we didn't. I mean, we're letting everybody's records stand, on their own. And I think that sometimes we forget also how much wealth and prosperity has been created in America during this period, since the age of globalization began. We've seen an explosion in equities and the stock market. Our companies were well positioned as the world went from 1 billion to 2 billion customers to 7 billion customers. We've continued to be global leaders in industry after industry. And because of that, our companies have become very valuable, and people who own stocks have gotten much wealthier, right? We've seen an explosion of wealth in America. Most of that wealth has happened under most of that wealth creation has happened under Democratic presidents. We've seen far better stock market performance under the Democrats. But again, you can see here the long boom. I mean, the Dow's gone from 2,000 to 32,000 during this period. It's an extraordinary period of wealth creation. And it's something we should be very proud of, frankly, in the United States. And this is the presidency. Biden's a little down. He's got time, right? He's got a couple, he's got at least 2 more years, maybe 6 more years. But you can see the incredible performance in the market under Clinton and Obama compared to Republicans. And this is why Trump's boasts about the market and wealth creation they rang so hollow in so many ways. I know in fiscal matters, which is going to be very front and center in our political discussion in the coming months, Republicans have been a disaster, actually, and Democrats have done a good job. This is the net change in the annual deficit by GDP as percentage of GDP under these presidents. You can see the deficit came way down. Under Democrats, it went up. Under Republicans, Trump had one of the worst fiscal records in American history. Not a big surprise. We all expected him to be fiscally profligate, and he was. And you can see just how extraordinary the deficit was under Trump and what happened here. I mean, this is Bush, right? This is the Bush deficit. And then this is Trump. And you can see that up until Reagan, the deficit bounced around in a, couple percentage points below GDP, of GDP. And then, supply side economics started coming, and then we entered a very different age of debt and deficits. I mean, this is largely due to Republican economic policies where they cut incomes and don't cut spending. And so, we even had Clinton get us to surplus for a period. If Clinton's budget had been kept by Bush, the entire national debt would have been eliminated by around 2010, 2011, right? But that didn't happen, and we saw the explosion of debt and deficits under the two Republican presidents since. And this is a really important talking point for any of you who are doing TV or doing commentary. The deficit went up every year of Trump's presidency, and it's gone down every year of Biden's presidency. Simple point, true, right? Again, this notion that somehow this team of Republicans are coming in, have a history of fiscal rectitude, it's a joke. And also on the issue of the debt ceiling, right? Since 1978, Steve Ratner put this out today on his Twitter feed. The debt ceiling has been raised far more often under Republican presidents than Democratic presidents, right? So this idea that somehow it's Democrats who somehow have this particular connection to deficits and debt, it's the exact opposite, right? I mean, the Republicans have created most of the debt that we have today. They've been far less effective at reining in the deficit, and they've raised the debt ceiling more than we have. And so, like many things in our politics, almost nothing the Republicans say is true, and particularly on these issues around fiscal matters. And on the question, though, that Democrats care about is, not just the wealth that's been created, but the distribution of that wealth. How are people doing, right? Not just, the overall economy. Americans are better off today than they were, right? And we've seen, this is a fun slide I found today. I hadn't seen this one. You can see the Asian performance. It's kind of amazing here. But, people are, the typical family, right, is better off today than they were, not by, 16 times like in the stock market, but the notion that somehow people have fallen behind, or that there's been a period during this age of globalization where folks have fallen behind and are less well off. I mean, that's just simply not true, right? And then this is another way of cutting it, which is household income, but by party. And similar to the other data that we've seen, the economy, regular people did far better under Democrats than they did under Republicans. Median income went up significantly under Trump. I mean, it was, it carried on this very rapid rise in the last few years, the Obama administration. But again, the typical family is making, $10,000, $12,000 more than they were in real terms, at the beginning of this time. That's not enough. I mean, this is good, but it's not good enough. And we can't be satisfied with this performance of the American economy. And this is a stat I found this is also came from Steve Ratner in the last few days. And this is an important one for anyone in the current debate. And again, about the argument Republicans are making that people have fallen behind under Biden. I mean, it's just simply not true. I mean, a typical family, because of very rapid rising wages and also because of the income support that we gave during the COVID, the typical family has more cash in the bank than they've had in a very long time, and a lot more, right? I mean, this is a big jump here. And it's one of the reasons why we've seen consumer spending stay strong, despite the economy beginning to slow down, right, as we need it to get inflation down. And so this is really kind of a remarkable stat, and this is the bottom 50%, right? This is of income earners in the country. And so again, people at the bottom, if you look at, and we don't have this data today, but it's been in some of my other writing, if you look at the distribution of the wage gains that have happened in the last couple of years, you've seen the biggest gains happen with people at the bottom of the United States. So this idea, again, that Republicans are arguing all the time that Biden's been a disaster and everyone's falling behind. I mean, none of that is true. I mean, certainly inflation has been a challenge, but it's not, there's a lot of other countervailing data to show that people are better off today. And let's just spend a minute just drilling down on how much better things are in America than they used to be. We're now not going into Democrat, Republican, but the unemployment rate today is lower than it's been in 50 years. And the only period that it was lower for a substantial period of time, going all the way back to World War II, was during the Korean War, right? And during wars often, and even this period was during the Vietnam War. We are at the lowest peacetime unemployment rate since World War II and the lowest in 50 years. Pretty remarkable, right? We also have the lowest uninsured rate in American history right now. You can see, what happened. We used to have a very high uninsured rate in the United States. We've cut that in half because of the ACA. This is an amazing achievement by the Democrats. Obviously, the Republicans fought us every step of the way, but tens of millions of people have gained health insurance in recent years, and the people who benefited the most have been African American and Hispanics. People who needed the help the most received it. This is a great achievement by the Democratic Party. We also are seeing a remarkable phenomenon that I've written about and talked about a lot over the last couple of years, which is new business formation, new business starts continue to be at a remarkably elevated level. This is a sign of entrepreneurship and resilience in the American economy. People are going out and working. We didn't fade during COVID, right? People went to work despite all the challenges of COVID. People kept working, and the can-do spirit of the American people was very evident over the last 2 years. It's been so remarkable to see. We also, in terms of just the recovery from COVID, we have done better. We've done better than any other G7 economy, right? So again, relative to the rest of the developed world, and advanced economies and democracies, we've done better than any of our competitors and allies. Wages. This is another really important thing that has been absent from the economic conversation, which is wages, however you cut it, wages are at a remarkably high level. And it's why, based on real earnings last year, it was actually positive. It was not negative. People did not fall behind in their earnings last year. Even with high inflation, wages outpaced it last year, and we'll have more data on that soon. But the story of the wage gains during inflation were never part of the economic conversation. All we heard was that things cost more. What we didn't hear was that people were also making much more money. And it's why I believe that one of the reasons the red wave never came in this election was because inflation was not as damaging to American workers as was often being portrayed in the national conversation. We certainly can talk about that in the Q&A. We also now have the most number of open jobs per unemployed people ever recorded. This is an incredible statistic. Every time I look at this, I can't really believe it. There are 2 open jobs for every unemployed person in America, meaning that we could use millions and millions of more workers. Everyone knows this. There are worker shortages all over the country. And we have many, many states who have the lowest unemployment rate that they've ever had today. I mean, there are some states that are under 2%. Full employment is considered to be 4%. We're at 3.5% nationally. There are many states under 3. There are even some under 2. We've never seen an employment situation like this in America in the modern era. It's really a remarkable thing. And then we've seen the trade deficit. In addition to the deficit coming down, the trade deficits come way down. And also just now starting to go a little bit further afield, because crime has been a big, point of discussion in the last few years. The crime rate in America is a shadow of what it used to be. I had a slide that I just didn't get in here tonight. The homicide rate in New York City, it's a fraction of what it's been. And it's a fraction of what it was. It's one of the lowest homicide rates New York has had in the last 170 years right now. This notion that somehow we're far less physically safe than we were, is being driven largely by the easy access to extraordinary weapons that are killing lots of people. But day-to-day crime and safety, right? The country's in a far better place than we were several decades ago. And we need to understand how to celebrate that progress that we've made while also, talking about the things that are happening now. But this notion that there's been some kind of upwelling of crime and that the country's become unsafe is just fundamentally not true. We also know that up until very recently, and the border crisis that we're now having, which is a complicated thing that I'm happy to discuss in the Q&A, that we had seen the undocumented immigrant rate come down. This notion that Democrats are for open borders is also a red wavy kind of fiction that the Republicans push. And, we actually saw the number of undocumented immigrants after galloping for a long time came way down under Obama and Biden. We now, though, have a different situation. The people who are coming into the country, by the way, the asylum claims and who are being led into the interior of the country who have been gotten through that first hurdle are not undocumented immigrants. They're documented immigrants, right? They have papers. We know they're here. They have court dates, right? So we still don't have recent data in the undocumented population. I'm very interested to see that. But certainly we got the border under control in the last Democratic administration. And Biden is now, I think, starting to really focus on this. And we're going to see, I think, a huge debate this year about the border and immigration. And we should welcome it as Democrats. And so, America, how are we doing today, right? I'm the hopium guy, and let's spend a little moment being, living in the sense of progress that we've made as a country. The lowest peacetime unemployment rate. We have the lowest. We've just in recent months, we've had the lowest poverty and uninsured rates ever in American history. The stock market is up. The Dow's up 16 times what it was in 1989. We had the best economic recovery from COVID in the G7. Biden's made historic investments that are going to propel growth and prosperity for decades to come. The biggest combination of public investment we've seen in our future prosperity since the 1960s. We have 2 job openings per unemployed persons. Wages and new business formation are at elevated levels. The trade and budget deficits are way down. Crime rates are a fraction of what they were a generation ago. Immigrant crime rates, something that comes up all the time, are far below what they are for native-born people, including for undocumented immigrants. Immigrants actually are far more law-abiding than native-born Americans. Teenage pregnancy rates are way down. College graduation rates are at an all-time high. One thing I just didn't get in here is that we've now seen immigrant college attainment rates match native-born, right? An incredible achievement. And so this idea that somehow there's this vast pool of immigrants who are dragging the country down, I mean, it could not be further from the truth. And so all of these remarkable things have happened, right? I've laid all this out while all this has happened, while we've seen this period of historic immigration into the United States. The percentage of our population that is foreign-born is very high by historical standards now. And so rather than the Republican argument, which is letting all these people into the country has made things far worse for America, I think the exact opposite is true, right? We're better off today because of this migration that's taken place. Democrats have to lean into this debate around immigration in the coming months. We should have nothing to fear from it. And, all the measures of people's feelings about immigration, it's really interesting. During the Trump era, all the ways that you measure immigration in polling got better. And I think when people were forced to think about what immigration meant to them, they actually came out in the right place, right? This is a sign where legal immigration in the United States, has dropped. The number of people who want it decreased has dropped significantly during the Trump presidency, right? It's the exact opposite, I think, of what many people would think. Issues around globalization and trade are also not an anathema. They're not a dangerous place for people in the Democratic coalition. I mean, we are a younger, very immigrant-heavy party, and people want to be connected to the outside world. It's Republicans that have become nativist and protectionist over the last, few years, not the Democrats, not our voters, right? Our voters are pro-immigrant and pro-trade and pro-connectivity and pro-globalization, right? And so many measures today, right? Life in America is better than it's been in a long time. And obviously it's been due to us, right? And the work that we've done. The Republicans during their time in power have not done their part. And what's really important to recognize is that our success as a party has not just been in governing, but it's been in politics too. And let's go through this. When I worked for Bill Clinton in 1992, right, we had lost, I think, 4 out of the last 5 presidential elections, some of them by historically large margins. And the goal of Bill Clinton and the New Democrats in 1992 was to make the Democrats a competitive presidential party again, to make sure we could win the popular vote and win elections. And this is the results that we are, since then, which is that we've won the popular vote in 7 out of 8 presidential elections. That's never been done before by an American political party. This is the best popular vote run of a political party in American history. And you can see that our margin has averaged about 4 percentage points. Look at the Republican number here, right? They haven't hit 50% of the vote nationally in a presidential election since 2004, and they've only broken 48% one time during this entire period, right? And yet they have 2/3 of the Supreme Court. I mean, we can get into that. It's just an absurdity the way this works. But again, we have a lot to be proud of here. We've not just performed well in governing, but we've also done well politically. But of course, these things are connected, right? I mean, we're being rewarded for having governed the country well. You can see this is party ID over a long period of time. It's also leans more Democratic. That people just basically like Democrats more than Republicans, right? There are more Democrats in the country than there are Republicans. This has been for this whole period of globalization. It's bounced around. In 2021, Republicans actually went positive for a little while. I'm interested to see Gallup's new data on this. But, party ID, if you look at the Navigator, we're up by about 5 points in party ID right now in Navigator polling. And so if what I'm saying is true, right, that we've done a really good job, they haven't done their part, right, things have gotten better when we've been in power, not so much when they've been in power, then you would expect the people who came of age politically during this period to reflect that, right, that they would see the Democrats being better. Well, we've gotten more votes, but that there would be a difference in attitude among younger Americans than older Americans, right? Because if the story of older Americans was the once great Democratic Party falling apart in the 1960s, and Ronald Reagan, coming in as a knight on his white horse and saving the country, those people, right? You could see how those people under that narrative would lean a little bit Republican. But if the narrative of people who are younger have no memory of Reagan, and the only Republican presidents they've known are the Bushes and Trump, then you would expect them to believe that the Democratic Party was a better party, right? And that's exactly what's happened. And this is really important now, right? This is because we've seen arguably the structural change of under 45-year-old voters is one of the most significant things that's happening in American politics today. I haven't put 2022 down because, as some of you know who do data, there's a lot of conflicting data about 2022. The exit polls and Pew are kind of all over the place, but the exits had the under 45 vote at 13, which would still be up in this high structural place that we've seen. And Pew had a plus 20 in 2022, and that would make it the second best during this period. So let's just say we average it, we put it around 17. That still puts the under 45 vote up there with the best performances in recent history. Part of the argument I'm making here is that this is a structural thing that's happened, right? We're continuing to see these double-digit margins for Democrats among under 45-year-old voters again and again and again, which means that, it would be really smart if we really focused on getting more young people to vote, right? The numbers with 18 to 29-year-olds are even more remarkable, right? And this is not a big surprise. Do I have the data here? We're still getting in. Again, we do have conflicting data here. In some, it's over 35, and some it's under. So let's put it in the low 30s. And remember, I want to be clear about one thing, if I can go back, is that, Biden did better among under 45-year-old voters than Obama did, which shows how structural this has become, right? Despite Biden's age, this has become a structural problem for the Republican Party, a structural advantage for the Democratic Party. It's one of the reasons why states with lots of young people like Arizona and Georgia, for example, are becoming more Democratic. And this really matters over time, right? Because the younger generations are going to become an increasingly larger percentage of the overall electorate every 2 years, right? The number this is a big deal. Now, is it true that as people get older, they get more conservative? The answer to that is no, actually. The answer to that is no. Generations take on a certain orientation, and they may be marginally different, but these are very worrisome things for the Republican Party as they look forward to the future of American politics. And so I just want to, just to try to get to the final few minutes of the presentation, despite all this economic success and everything I just laid out for you, right? Biden and the Democrats are underperforming on economic issues, and we've got to look at this head on. We can't run away from this, because this is one of the most confounding things in our politics today, which is that Republicans have a structural advantage on the economy, despite having brought us to 3 consecutive recessions and Democrats having done such a good job. We should not put up with it. I mean, it's one of my goals is to make us winning this economic argument this year with the Republicans something that is critical so that we can get to a place of advantage. The structural problem for Biden began during the campaign. This isn't something that happened when inflation began. His numbers in the exit polls in the AP Votecast in 2020, if you look at this top set of numbers, is that, he did very well with COVID voters, which is why he won, right? But among people who said economy and jobs, Trump beat him by 62 points, actually 62 points. Incredible, right? Kind of mind-boggling number. And then on the other question related, better able to handle the economy, Trump was plus 12. Trump had just seen massive job loss and we were in a recession, and he still beat Biden handily on all the economic measures. So Biden came into the presidency in a structural deficit on the economy, which has continued throughout his presidency, right? It's been, even this is June 16th of 2021 in Navigator. You can see the difference in how people viewed his economic performance. The structural, at this point, the economy was booming. His budget had passed, inflation had not started ticking up significantly. And so, here he is way below other important measures, showing again the structural challenge for Biden on economic issues. This is this week. This is data that just came out this week. Do you approve or disapprove the way Joe Biden's handling the economy? He's minus 13. I just showed you all that economic data, right? I mean, there's just no question that we're all better off today than we were. Country's better off by, in every possible way. And yet he's still way below his handling of the economy is way below his overall job approval. This is an issue. I mean, we need to fix this year. This is something that's got to get fixed. And this is also, I think, a fascinating look at this. I love Navigator's graphics. Jobs in the economy overall, when you put Democrats in, we do better. But among independents, right, we're minus 11 on jobs in the economy. We're minus 14 on economic stability in the country. We're minus 18 on inflation. We can't have the election that we want to have in 2024 if we don't improve here. I mean, this is just like a threshold issue. We have to do better on economic issues. We have to win the economic argument. And even look at this breakdown of non-MAGA Republicans. These are people that would be remotely sympathetic to our arguments. We've got to win some percentage of these people to do well in the election. Look at our economic numbers here. We're down 72 points with non-MAGA Republicans on the economy. This is just too much. It's too big. We got work to do here. And the good news is we have a really strong track record to run on, right? So let me conclude with a few thoughts. One is that this idea that you often hear in our politics, that there's a left and right and that we're equally virtuous and equally full of vice, is red wavy, right? It's a fiction. It's a right-wing fiction because they know they're not as good as we are. And by creating this false equivalency, right, they obscure the progress and the extraordinary things the Democratic Party has done during this period. We have to reject any attempt to create a left-right symmetry in our politics. Asymmetry is what we have to want. We want contrast, not similarity, right? And we have to, in the coming months, establish this fundamental contrast between us being responsible and good, them being reckless and bad, and all the ways that we want to do it, and having let the country down. This is an essential communications task of the Democratic Party. I really believe that we're in a bigger moment than we all collectively understand. I think we were so focused on just getting through COVID that we have to take a step back and realize there's so much opportunity for American leadership right now, for us to begin to really chart a new course, reinvigorate the global liberal order. And we're being called again, I think, in a way that I don't think we yet really understand, to join in that fight between democracy and autocracy, the thing that really potentially is the definitional fight of our party. We saved the world from totalitarianism in World War II. We helped fight the Cold War. This is a definitional part of who we are as Democrats, the great warriors for democracy. And I think we're being called on it again, being called on to do it again. And I think that when I think back to this period since the World War II, this simple formula that FDR came up with in 1941, the four freedoms, these are the freedoms. This is who we are, right? This is the most important speech ever given by a Democratic leader in our history, in my view. This became the guidepost for the world. These are the 4 foundational values of the United Nations that became the way the entire world was organized after World War II. And it was all organized around freedom, right? There's a big discussion in our party about rediscovering freedom, patriotism, optimism, all these things. The foundations of the modern Democratic Party are built upon these 4 pillars of freedom. This is who we are. We want freedom, right? We don't want control. We want people to be able to live their own lives. And this contrast, I think, is also going to be very bright with the authoritarian impulses of Greater MAGA here in the United States, and something that we have to get deeply grounded into, because this is who we are. This is our party. This is the foundation of everything that we built. The entire world that we live in is built on top of these freedoms that were offered by Democrats, right, in the 1940s. And that world that we built after World War II, that FDR imagined in 1941 in that speech, has created a golden age in human history. There's never been a better period to be alive in all of human history. And the Democratic Party has done more good for more people than any other organized political force in all of human history. This is not an exaggeration, right? I mean, look at extreme poverty has plummeted during this period. More people live in free societies than any time in human history. And we know even things as something as simple as life expectancy, has soared during this time after World War II. And so, we live in a golden age of opportunity and possibility. People have more possibilities and more opportunity of all kinds than any time in all of human history. And friends, we did that, right? Our party did that. That's something that we imagined and built. And it's why we have to fight to maintain it, because it is a remarkable thing that we've been able to do, is to take that revolutionary spirit in the 18th century and bring it into the rest of the world. And it's one of the reasons why authoritarians here and abroad are fighting this so hard. And I think it's really important as we go forward to lean into our extraordinary legacy as Democrats. I do this every day because I believe I'm part of the greatest party in the history of the world. And the things that we've done for the world and for the United States during this period is something that we have to celebrate and understand, be inspired by, not be obedient and nostalgic to it, but to inspire us for equally bold actions. I think the economic agenda of the president the last 2 years was very much in keeping these kind of bold and critical and courageous reforms and programs that Democrats have offered during our lifetime. We've done a lot of good, folks, and we need to lean into it more. And I used to then stop in this presentation here, but in the last 2 years, I've had to add this, which is the Republicans have not just failed to do their part when they've been in power, but there's now a degree of malevolence in their politics that we just can't look away from. And I think American people have come to understand that MAGA is something very different than Republican, and that we have to recognize that a deep malevolence has come into our politics. It's no longer just that they haven't done their part, and we have to be clear-eyed about this and understand why it is this moment is so critical, right? Because if we lose power to these folks, there are things that can happen that we will regret for a very long time. And so when people talk about what's gone wrong with America and what's all the problems in the United States, right, I want to remind everybody about this, is that it isn't, that Washington is broken or our politics is broken. The Republican Party is broken. And that's what has caused us to not be as far ahead as we want. That's the source of our struggles and our problems right now. When Democrats have been in power, the country's gotten better. We've been able to make globalization work. We've been able to get crime rates down. We've been able to get the deficit down. We've been able to manage against change well and effectively over a long period of time. They haven't. And this inability of the Republican Party to have created a modern politics post-Reagan in a new age of globalization is a tragedy for the United States and the world. And that's why we have to work so hard to loosen the grip of MAGA, continuing to defeat them, make MAGA a clear loser for Republicans so they can start to become a center-right party instead of the MAGA party that they are. Because we just simply have to remember every day the stakes here are higher than we all realize. Thanks, everybody, very much. Appreciate you being here. If you are new to NDN in my world, stay connected to us through NDN. And I'm Simon WDC on Twitter and YouTube. I'm now going to open it up for questions. And and come be myself here. Oh, look at my crazy hair. Let's open it up. You can two ways to ask questions, right? One is to in the Q&A box below, and the other is by raising your hand. And let me go to Q&A. Got a bunch of questions. Thanks, Frank. That was fantastic. I'll start with that. Why don't we? Because we're the part, we're the Hopium gang here. Lots of questions here. Steve Claremont, my dear friend. We can also thank Meister Greenspan for fretting about the federal debt would be retired too quickly without the budget tax cuts, right? I mean, there was an idea that we actually needed to keep the American debt. This is I was around during these debates, long forgotten now. This was 20 years ago. But we had a massive surplus at the end of the Clinton administration, and that surplus would have retired all the national debt. But there were many people who thought that was actually a bad idea, and we could have a long talk about this. But Stephen, thanks for putting that into the chat. So Susan asks, a question about poverty line and financial wreckage and everything else. I just want to say the clear argument I'm making here, right, is I'm not telling you that everybody's doing great, but we're doing better. And things are better than people understand. And the continued pessimism around the economic performance of the United States is just not grounded in reality. I mean, it may be that that too many people are living paycheck to paycheck, but fewer are than used to be, right? Families are making more money. I mean, there's virtually no data that you can find that things are worse today than they were 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. The idea that somehow things have gotten worse, it's just fundamentally not true. And people that make that argument are just not telling the truth. It's just not true. I just showed you a mountain of data, right? I mean, median income, right? Median earnings, the poverty rate is lower today than it's ever been in the last few months. It hit the lowest number ever recorded. We have fewer people without health insurance ever in in American history. We have the lowest unemployment rate in peacetime in 70 years. Yes, you can find and poke holes in this. It's not perfect, but it's better. And we have to be sophisticated enough as patriots and people who are proud of our country to be able to say that things are better, but they're not good enough, right? This is not a complicated thing. And I think that we as Democrats, and part of what in my battling the red wave over the last 6 months, 7 months, one of the things I was battling was our own pessimism, our own inability, our living as a party as the glass half empty instead of glass half full. And, there is a party that believes the country is in decline and doing worse today. It's the Republican Party. We don't beat them with our own version of pessimism. We have to be the party of hopium and optimism and belief that tomorrow is going to be better than today. And I'm mounting an enormous amount of data showing you that that is actually the case. You can build your own deck showing that things are not as good as they used to be. Good luck, because the data just isn't there. And so I think that as Democrats, we have to be able to be facile enough and honest enough with each other and the American people that things are far better because of us and our economic policies, but they're not good enough. And we still have a lot more work to do. And that's why Biden worked so hard over the last 2 years to pass the CHIPS Act and the infrastructure bill and the climate bill that he passed. And we had the child tax credit for a year and then it went away, right? There are still things we can do, but this notion that the country is in some kind of precipitous economic decline and people are far worse off today than they used to be is false. And this is not something that should be repeated by Democrats. One of the things I forgot to mention is that I showed you the median income that went so much up under Democrats, right? Is that one of the things you hear from our leaders is that wages and incomes have been flat for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. That's not true. It's just not true, right? I just showed you. I mean, that a typical family is doing substantially better than they used to be. The NEC had a report out just recently in the last few months showing that a typical family is much further ahead than they were 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So we've got to get this pessimism out of our system as Democrats because it's misplaced. It's who they are. It's not who we are. And I think this is part of the reason I do this presentation. It's part of the reason that I'm spending much more time and energy communicating to people in this country through Twitter and these kinds of presentations and the presentations I've been doing to lots of grassroots groups around the country, because I think we've been red waved as a party, that we've been sold a series of arguments that things are far worse than they really are. And I think by repeating those arguments, we're selling the American people short. I am just blown away by the can-do spirit of the American people during this period of COVID, by the resilience and grit that they showed to go out and get us to the lowest unemployment rate, the best recovery in the G7, the lowest uninsured rate, the lowest poverty rate. That's our achievement as a country. We should be celebrating that. That's not Joe Biden and the Democrats. We all did that. And what a remarkable country this is. And that's why I'm here tonight. So Annie asks about, chaotic climate change in economic forecast. Look, it's one of the reasons why Joe Biden and the Democrats are doing everything we can to accelerate the energy transition, to build a global politics, to move us into a far better place in climate. This is obviously one of the 3 or 4 big challenges for us, right? As a country, as a world. And we just did more to attack climate change in the last few months than any political party and any government in the entire world. And I'm really proud of this. And I think that the money we're spending now to accelerate decarbonization is going to create lots of follow-on capital. And that Joe Biden, I think when books are written about him in future years, I think he will get a lot of credit for having been the person that really accelerated in a critical moment this movement towards a new energy future and decarbonization. This is going to be really hard. And for younger people who are here tonight, my kids, right? This issue of how fast we go and how far we can get ahead of climate disruption, it's going to be an extraordinary challenge. But we have stepped up and done our part here. And it's interesting that it will be very interesting to see whether McCarthy and the House Republicans really do position themselves firmly in the camp of fossil fuel producers and climate denialists. I mean, this is going to be an enormous challenge for the Republicans in the coming months. I mean, I forgot to put it in the deck. I'll have it in tomorrow's presentation, but oil production this year in the United States in 2023 will be the highest in history. So the whole Republican attack on Democrats being anti-fossil fuels and trying to kill oil production and not producing leases and all this, it's all red wavy bullshit, right? Okay. Let me just see. Let me just talk about the question here about how do we win the economic argument. And for those of you who've seen me do other presentations recently, I've been addressing this a lot. And we did a whole event last week on what I call loudness. And there's no question that we have a strategic and structural imbalance in this country between a very loud MAGA Republican Party and a Democratic Party that just isn't as structurally loud as they are. And I think they have the ability to move memes into the mainstream and sort of dominate daily discourse in this country in a way that is dangerous for our democracy. You saw it play out over the last 2 years, the screaming about recession, inflation, fentanyl, red wave, right? Make your list, CRT, wokeness, right? Usually one word, it's often one word, exclamation point, arms waving in the air. They push these things into the national discourse. Democrats are on the defensive. And we have to now not just be focused, as I did today, in telling a better story and embracing a narrative of our success and their failure, but we have to get louder. And louder, to me, we did a whole event last week with 4 organizations that I think are leading the way, that are important organizations in our family: Midas Touch, Resolute Square, Courier, Newsroom, and Deep State Radio, who are all innovative, pioneering new media organizations that you should get to know and watch our video from last week if you haven't done it. But I also think there's an important role for all of us to play as proud patriots and as information warriors. I think that, to me, in the next 2 years, the way that we get louder than Republicans is if, we think of the war room not as 20 sweaty kids cutting videos and drinking Red Bulls, right? But the war room is 4 million Americans getting up every day doing their part to spread the kind of charts and graphs and the good news that I'm sharing here with all of their networks and however they do it, right? Consider yourself, if you are a volunteer and you write postcards, you knock on doors, or you text or make phone calls, there's another piece. That's a way of bringing our message to people. But there's another way too, which is that we need to use the tools of modern communications to become more networked and more amplified and louder than they are. This is an urgent task. I really, as somebody who fought the red wave, part of what the red wave was, it was a fiction created by them that became the mainstream fiction and the understanding of our election. And it was false and wrong. And I think it probably cost us the House at the end of the day. And we have to learn from their ability to control the daily discourse. And we've got to fight harder and smarter and better and be louder. And I think there's no place that's more important than on the economic issues here. I mean, I just showed you just clear objective data that we've done a far better job than they have over a very long period of time. And the American people don't know it. That's our fault. It's not the media's fault. That's our fault. We can, and you know what? The good news is we can fix it. We can fix that. We have the power to do it. We have more agency here. If we set about to do it, right? We won these last elections. We gained in the battlegrounds. We did extraordinary things last year. The big next extraordinary thing we have to do is to use this opportunity of the debt ceiling and the Republican economic debate they want to have, to use it to define the terms of the debate along the ways I've described and win this economic argument in the coming months. I'm very optimistic that we can do it if we set our minds to it, and if all of you decide what role you're going to play as information warriors to help us become louder and more effective in communicating all this in the weeks and months ahead. There are no raised hands, so let me just keep going. Sue just said, I wish 10% of the facts that were stated or on radio, TV. Well, help me, right? You know, like we all have a role to play here. You know, yeah, I present this to members of Congress and people. I mean, look, one of the core charts in this deck, the jobs by month, is a chart that Joe Biden uses at every economic press conference he has. I mean, some of this stuff is, you know, has been incorporated into the White House. You know, and, you know, the jobs per month was not a stat that you could find in economic terms. It was jobs by year. And I created that in the middle of 2021 and it became adopted. I mean, Ron Klain tweets this stuff, my threads out all the time. I mean, the White House is very aware of this stuff. And yeah, we have a lot of work to do. Look, we should not be satisfied with where we are here in this. And Scott raises an interesting question about, you know, just why do people, I don't know that people feel that they're falling behind, by the way. I mean, I've also come to believe that I think we need to really reevaluate in the way that I think that there was a lot of analytical failure in our elections. I think there's been a lot of analytical failures on economic issues over the last few years. And I think that, you know, there's like, for example, there's enormous differences between people, how people think the economy is doing and how they're doing, right? And often people think they're doing far better than the overall economy. I mean, the number of people, for example, who are dissatisfied in their jobs is only, you know, 25, 30%, for example. I mean, we've got to figure out, this is something I want to spend a lot of time on, which is that I don't think we poll well on economic issues. I think that people have, like usually in most polling, people have far more complex views about these things than has often been able to be sussed out by very simple polls. And, you know, I think that, but we also have to recognize as Democrats is that people aren't going to believe that things are better unless we actually argue that they are. You can't score unless you shoot, right? People are not, you know, if they're being told every day that things are terrible and the other side is saying, yeah, they're just not as terrible as they say they are, well, then people are going to think things are terrible. And I do think that we did not really handle the inflation debate well as a party. I'm in a probably minority position in the Democratic Party about this. And I think we should have been talking much more about how strong the economy was and inflation was too high. Instead, we started a lot of our discourse by acknowledging inflation was too high. So we essentially were using up our chits with our ability to talk to voters. We were reinforcing the central attack against us. And I think that's at a basic like comms level. I didn't think that was very smart, right? I think you have to go on offense, make your case, and then explain, you know, then you can defend. If you start by defense, you're losing. And I think we have to, I dissent in essence from many in the party who believe that we had to start our economic conversation by, by acknowledging the struggle of people. I just don't know. I don't know. I think this is a really important debate, and I dissented from it, and I could be wrong, by the way. I may be wrong about that. But we only did as well as we did in this election, Scott, because people believe that things were better. Enough people believe things are better. And I think 54% of voters in the exit polls said that their own economic situation was either better or the same as it was 2 years ago. And if people really believe that Biden had been a bad president and things were in the crapper, right, we wouldn't have gained ground in 7 of the battleground states. I mean, it had to be that they were too crazy and we had done a good enough job. And that's what I mean. Like, we know based on how people voted, not how they answered a poll, on how they felt about us. Because in 7 of the most important battleground states, we gained ground from 2020, right? That wouldn't have happened if they thought we sucked and done a bad job. So we do need, I think, to find a better way to come to understand all of this. There are a few hands raised. We're actually, let me do this. We're hitting time, and I want to wrap it up. And I want to say that there are a lot of great questions here I didn't get to. Jim, thank you. It's all red wavy bullshit. I want to just end by saying something for those of you who got to know me during the last 6 months and our journey together fighting the red wave, is that I'm going to start trying to popularize this concept of red wavy, and you're welcome to join me in this. And to me, what red wavy is a manufactured falsehood that's been sold by the right, that's been bought by the mainstream discourse, that eventually gets proven to be wrong, right? And what's incredible is that that's probably 75% of the discourse, political discourse in the country. I mean, fentanyl and candy, remember we were debating for 2 months about whether we were in recession when we clearly weren't, just because Republicans were screaming it, right? Their ability to be loud and wave their arms up in the air and scream to then drive the daily discourse is a material threat to the health of our democracy. We can't ignore it any longer, but nor are we powerless. And that's the most important message here, is that the time of us crapping on each other, of claiming that the media is all terrible and complaining, right? As one of my Peloton instructors always says, complaining isn't conversation, right? Is that I think we lost our sense of agency and power in this last election for a while. We regained it when we needed it. But I want to just conclude by the following sort of meditation, which is that for a lot of 2021 and 2022, we felt weak, right? We felt divided. We didn't feel good about ourselves and our party. I've come to believe that the central project of Greater MAGA is to inject negative sentiment into the life of the country, and that we need to become more conscious about putting positive sentiment down into our discourse as a response to the negative sentiment machine that MAGA and Trump and Fox News have become. The negative sentiment machine wants us to feel worse about ourselves, about our leaders, our country, our democracy, each other, everything, the whole American project. I'm not willing to go by that. And I think that part of what I'm developing this presentation is a response to that. Fact, data-filled rebuttal to the negative sentiment and the poisonous pessimism coming out of the right. And I want you to join me in all of this. I'm just a guy. I'm not wealthy. I'm not an elected official. I'm just a private citizen in my room with my dog here over my shoulder, Tug, who's been my writing partner over the last 6 months. I'm just a guy doing this work. And you're just guys and girls doing this work too. We all have to have a greater sense of agency and urgency and recognize that we have more power than we understand. We're strong, they're weak. We're divided. Let me do that again. We're strong, they're weak. We are united, they're divided. We govern well, they're reckless and let the country down repeatedly, right? We run strong campaigns and have lots of money due to our powerful grassroots. They had terrible campaigns and bad candidates. In all the ways that you look at our politics, right? We are strong, they're weak. We need to have more sense of agency here and that we can beat them. And what you should be thinking about every day is, how do you make a little bit of a contribution every day? If 4 million people do this, we will defeat MAGA and the negative noise machine. We will reclaim the discourse here in the United States. We'll be able to have more power to tell our stories. Don't believe this is somebody else's job. It's your job too, right? I've taken responsibility for it. I do this work. Help me, right? Help get this out. Have people come to my presentations. The stuff will be on the internet. Share it with them. And the most important thing that I can end with is that, we can do this. We can defeat MAGA. We can loosen the grip of this poisonous politics from the Republican Party. We have no choice, right? I mean, we've been called before. We need to do it again. And we're all lucky and blessed to be part of this remarkable thing called the Democratic Party. But we have a lot of work ahead of us, and I look forward to doing it with all of you in the coming months and years. Take care, everybody. Have a good night.